Rangers, forest workers, hunters, and other woods people of Reddit, what is your scary experience in the woods that you still can't explain? We have a camp that we visit during the hunting months and about every other weekend in between that. To get to our camp, you have to turn off of a major road onto a gravel road, drive about a mile, then turn onto another gravel road for about a half mile. It's set between a few other camps, plus some residents that live out there. It's quiet, for the most part. There are some coyotes and bobcats. Bobcats are the worst due to their terrible scream. It sounds like a woman crying for help. There has also been a black panther and wild dogs. 2013 we were at the camp for Thanksgiving. We hunted, fished, cooked, drank, all that good camp stuff. On night, we're sitting around a fire, swapping funny stories and just listening to the silence of the woods. As we're talking, we all hear, "Help me." At first, we thought it was a bobcat. We listened some more and heard it again. It was a man's voice yelling "Help me" repeatedly. Now, our first instinct was to grab our guns. Second was to go towards the voice, but you never know what you will encounter in the woods. It was dark and cold. The hunters knew the area very well. We called the police, and explained everything to the responding officers. The weird part was that we never once heard it while the officers were with us. Not once. The officers left and we heard the man again, repeating "Help me." About half an hour later, the officers came back and we didn't hear any call for help. Again, silence. We all decided it was best to go inside our camp for the night. We never did find out anything. I've only been back to the camp once since then. Really freaked me out.
I've lived in the Smokies most of my life. Anywhere I've lived in the Smokies, I've been completely surrounded by woods, naturally. One night at like 1 a.m. I was sitting on my porch drinking a beer. If you haven't lived out here, during the summertime, nature is loud. It isn't quiet. Cicadas humming, frogs belching, etc. It's like the ultimate white noise. While I was drinking my beer, I had noticed that everything in the woods had gone quiet. Which is pretty easy to notice when you live here because that doesn't happen. Suddenly, I heard the most terrifying noise I had ever heard about, I think maybe a good 30 or 40 meters away from me. It was a loud, shrieking, literally blood-curdling scream like shrill. It sounded non-human. It wasn't a mountain lion because I've heard them before, and they're rare in the area I lived. I stood up, audibly said nope, and walked the freak inside. That was the one and only time that ever happened. I still live in the same house, and still drink the same beer on the same porch.
We always built a tiki house in our woods, just some normal kids, and had loads of fun. But every week when we came back, it was destroyed and we were sad as heck, and always built a new one. One day we saw a guy in a black hoodie taking our sticks apart. We never came back. I've lived on the high desert for most of my life, 6,000 above sea level if you're wondering. I was out riding my horse alone in the absolute middle of BFE in the Badlands, no trees, and hardly any brush to speak of, so sounds carry a long way and there is nowhere to hide for long, when all of a sudden his ears perk up. I feel my skin start to crawl like we're being watched. My normally mellow gelding starts to panic. I start to feel really dizzy, and my horse stumbles. I black out. I come to an hour or so later about 3 miles away from the inciting incident still on my horse. He is frothing with sweat and shaking all over. I'm still not sure what happened. I had plenty of water and snacks. It was 65-ish degrees and breezy, so I don't believe weather or dehydration/hunger were a factor. I have never before or after had a fainting spell, and that was the most reliable, quiet horse I've ever owned. I now have a serious case of the heebie-jeebies again just thinking about it.
Not my story, but my younger sister's, early 20s. She was in Colorado last year and went hiking with her friend. The plan was to hike up the mountain, stop midway and camp, then finish the hike the next morning. They started their hike and stopped for camp midway. She said it started dumping rain that night, which meant the top would most likely be snow. The next morning they continued their hike, but it started getting complicated. Her friend only wore Chaco sandals and not proper hiking boots as they didn't expect the snow. They stopped at a creek and were deciding if they wanted to turn back on account. They weren't prepared properly when they heard a faint "help me." They both stood still. They heard it again. They decided to follow up the creek to the woman's voice. They got to a clearing that was covered in snow and found a woman laying in it in basic athletic clothing, leggings, light pullover jacket, and athletic shoes. My sister said her legs were swollen, discolored and had nasty cuts on them. My sister asked her how long she had been out there and the woman said only a few hours. My sister was like, "Okay, we need to get you down this mountain." The woman was like, "No, I need to go up the mountain, that's where my car is parked." My sister was like, "No, there is no driving access at the top of the mountain," which was a sign that this woman was confused. They get her down the mountain and my sister just kept saying how confused this woman was. They get to the bottom and they find this woman's car. My sister couldn't get cell service to call 911 during this, by the way. Anyways, my sister tells this woman she's going to drive her to the hospital, but the woman is standing strong that she would just like to go back to her bed and breakfast. My sister takes her there while driving this woman's car. Once the woman is at the bed and breakfast, she thanks them and goes in. My sister spoke to the owners and was like, "You have to call a medic, she is severely confused and not acting normal." They call a medic and transport her to a hospital. Turns out this woman is from Chicago, has low blood pressure, and it was her first time ever hiking a mountain. She was also alone. She had passed out during her hike, then it dumped snow on her. She was hypothermic and only thought she'd been out for a few hours. She was out overnight in the dark, cold and alone. I couldn't imagine the terror she must have felt. Anyways, my sister went and saw her at the hospital and the woman thanked her for saving her life. They still lightly keep in touch.
Not my story, but my dad's. When my dad was in his 20s, he was staying with my mom at a small cabin in the woods of Colorado. It was fairly remote. There was another cabin about a mile away and a campground maybe 3 miles down the valley. Late one afternoon, he was out fishing on a nearby river by himself. As the lights started fading, he decided to call it a day and head back to the cabin for dinner. As he was walking back through the woods, he got an eerie feeling that he was being watched. But he couldn't see anyone or anything. He kept walking back, and then suddenly he heard a stick break behind him. He stopped, looking back for the source of the sound, but still didn't see anything. He nervously kept walking back, a little quicker, and then heard another stick break, whirls around and still, nothing. This happens like 3 or 4 times, but every time he stopped to listen and look, there was total silence and nothing else moving. By the time he finally made it back to the cabin, it was nearly dark. He never did find out what was following him, but whatever it was left him alone after that. His best guess was a mountain lion stalking him or something. Really unsettling though.
Backwoods hiking/camping trip up in Maine. Trail intersected overgrown logging road. Check topo map. Saw logging toad lead to isolated pond. Hiked to pond. Found small clearing. Perfect spot to camp. Went to bed shortly after sunset, 8:30 p.m.-ish. Woke up around 1:30 a.m. to distant but loud noises coming from all angles around us. Up the logging road both directions, across the pond and in the woods. Deep bass Y groans and hoots, occasionally hitting higher pitched noted. Been in the woods for most of my adult life. Have come in contact with just about all the larger mammals of the Northeast, and have never heard those noises before. Haven't heard them again either. Will never forget that sound.
Not anything like this myself, but a friend told me this story. So he goes with a buddy to hike a trail near our town. Northern Washington state, so lots of woods and trees. When they get to the trailhead, there's one other car there, and he remembers seeing a person in that car. The person in the car was just staring at them, with what he described as a really wide unchanging face. He kept staring right at them without trying to hide it or look away. My friend got creeped out, and decided to leave. In the next week or 2 after that, a couple of hikers and a ranger turned up dead in that same area. Pretty sure they caught the guy, but I don't remember if his photo was posted. Super creepy. Couple good friends of mine fight fires, and in W Estate summers business is usually booming. This year a fair-sized crew of about 10 of them are miles and miles deep into the Cascades doing dig lines. I'm talking like 60 miles away from anything, middle of nowhere. As they're hiking through they come to a clearing and there's 2 landed Black Hawk helicopters and about 7 fully armed military personnel. They all point their rifles at the fire crew and demand to know what they are doing there. My friend tells them they're doing fire digs and they're scheduled to be up there. They are told to turn around and forget that they saw anything up there. My friend says, "But this is government work, we have to do this, this is our job." Military guy says, "Not today, you're done, get the freak out of here now." Some serious Chronicle type crap. I've never wanted to know so badly about what the heck was going on out there.
Kinda creepy thing happened to me when I was a student forester this summer. So, the forest I was working in was about 20 kilometers from the nearest town, which contained around 1,200 people, and we usually set out for whatever task we have to do in the forest at around 7 a.m. So we are at the forest at around 7:30 a.m. and we are about 12 kilometers up the road when we turn a corner very slowly and see what I initially thought to be a weird-looking bush or statue, but it was in fact a person, sitting on a carved-out stump on the side of the road, just sitting there. What really threw me off was the fact that this person had a parka on and a balaclava underneath it in the middle of summer. We drove by this person real slow and he lifted a hand to wave slowly as we drove past, and it was just super creepy. Never saw them again after that, but it did make going out on excursions a little more uneasy sometimes when alone.
About 20 years ago I had just finished my degree and was bummed because I couldn't find a job. A former roommate/good friend and I went on an overnight backpack trip near Burrough State Park in southeast Ohio. About 2 a.m. we were awoken in our tent by the sound of dozens of horses being ridden all around us. We could hear muted conversation, harness jingling, hoofs clopping, and we could feel it shaking the ground. We laid in our tent and the sound just kept on, like a whole convoy was passing right beside us. After a few minutes we unzipped the tent and the sounds immediately ceased and nothing was there. It was freaky. We were afraid they were going to ride over us, it was so intense. I have no idea who or what it was, but we're camped on a trail that had been used by John Morgan Hunt's Confederate raiders during the Civil War. Not a logical explanation, but it was deafening. There were so many horses. I can still hear men's voices murmuring as they rode by. Next morning not a single hoof print to be found.